Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend AC Churchill, and my pronouns are they, them. I am a contractor with Faith Action Network working on clean energy upgrades and resourcing sacred communities with clean energy work. And so excited for you all to be here with us today. Um, for this really perfect. Glad. Thank you so much for helping to admit those folks in for our project or our webinar called Resourcing Projects, How Mission-Driven Organizations Can Benefit from Clean Energy Tax Credits. You'll see there are a lot of different organizations involved in this work. And you know what? It takes a community, it takes a team, it takes people working together to make sure that resources get out to those community members who need it. So we are glad that you are here with us. Whether you are watching right now live with us or will be watching this recording later, you could have been doing something else with your time and instead you decided to be here with us. And so we are so grateful. Um, Today, joining Faith Action Network is an amazing group of colleagues from Lawyers for Good Government, L4GG, who will introduce themselves in just a minute. But I'm going to take just a moment prior to introduce who Faith Action Network is. For those of you who may not know fully who we are or what we're doing or what we do. So Faith Action Network, or FAN, is a multi-faith movement of individuals and communities from across Washington State. We are Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Quaker, Sikh, Unitarian Universalist, and people of conscience, and more. And we celebrate our religious diversity and the unique wisdom that each faith tradition and spiritual practice brings to our work for justice. It's also important, really important for our work and the work that we do across Washington State to acknowledge that we gather here in this time, in this place, and in all of the ways that FAN gathers for public action and advocacy as a statewide organization, that we gather on the lands of 29 federally recognized tribes and those who are still seeking recognition, as well as those tribes and communities who have chosen not to go down that journey of seeking federal recognition. We honor these people, their stories, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, who continue to steward this land and teach us and share, and we journey together with all of the Indigenous communities across Washington State and beyond. So with that said, I'm going to end my share of slideshow and pass it over to our colleagues from Lawyers for Good Government as they move through the bulk of today's conversation around resourcing the projects that you have in mind for your mission-driven organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend AC. I can kick us off. We are Lawyers for Good Government, and we're here to talk about elective pay. Quick intro of who you have on the call today. We have AC Meyer, the supervising tax attorney for L4GG. They will present at the middle of the presentation. My name is Camilla. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a staff attorney with Lawyers for Good Government. And then we also have Minho Park, who is our senior project manager, who's going to talk more about the Washington SETCAP program. And yeah, thank you all for having us. All right, a fun legal disclaimer to start. And also, sorry, we have Kira as well, and Stacy, who helps make all this possible. So lots of L4GG folks. So AC and I, we're attorneys, but we're not your attorneys. We're really just here to give a general overview of elective pay, these tax credits. This is all educational and not legal advice. If you have, let me see, I'm going to mute you, Amanda. Sorry, thank you. If you have any specific legal questions, please be sure to consult legal counsel. And I'm sure you all gave that waiver a diligent read. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to dive into what elective pay is. What are these tax credits that we're here to talk about today? So, pursuant to the Inflation Reduction Act, the federal government will give tax-exempt entities, which includes a lot of houses of worship, tax-free cash funding in the form of a refund. So it's on the back end, typically 30, but we can see up to 70% of the project costs for certain clean energy projects. So unlike a grant, there's no competition for these tax credits. It's a really great source of funding for clean energy projects in faith-based communities. Next slide, please. So what are some of the projects that we see houses of worship implementing with these clean energy tax credits? By far, the most popular is rooftop solar. And then we have also seen electric vehicle charging infrastructure, battery storage, and another really great credit is ground source heat pumps, which can be used for heating and cooling. Um, so since solar is one of the most common projects that we see with churches and temples, it's really helpful to go into more detail on that credit. So it's credit section 48E or the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit. And as we start to get into some of these more technical details, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. AC and I, we're going to be monitoring the chat, and we will, of course, leave time at the end to answer any questions. So we're really here for you all and what you need. But the Clean Energy Investment Tax Credit is a technology-neutral tax credit available for investments in facilities that generate clean electricity and for also those qualified energy storage, like the batteries that I mentioned. The credit is generally worth around 30% of eligible property or project costs, provided that applicable prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met, depending on the project size. What are eligible costs? So that typically includes equipment and other qualifying expenditures associated with the project. We can talk more about that. That's something that AC and I get a lot of questions on. The credit's not available until the property is placed in service. After the eligible property is operational, it's placed in service, then the entities can claim the credit if they qualify. A really key consideration here that ACNA also recommend a lot or advise on is that the credit is subject to a 5-year recapture period. So if the property ceases to qualify during that 5-year period, for example, maybe ownership changes in a way that affects the eligibility of the property, or it's not used in a qualifying manner, a portion of that credit may be subject to be repaid. And then finally, I mentioned those ground source heat pumps. This Section 48E, it replaced what we're calling like the legacy Section 48 credit for almost all clean electricity projects, except, those heat pumps. And it applies generally to eligible property and facilities that were placed in service after December 31st of 2024. Next slide, please. So I talked about that recapture. These are some things that are helpful to keep in mind at a really high level. And again, AC and I can answer questions or drop them in the chat, but the entity filing for the tax credit needs to own the project. So for example, the church itself would need to own the solar panels. There's no partnerships generally. And then another really key piece is the financing. So remember that this credit is back end. So you don't get the credit until after it's placed in service. So you need your capital stack up front to pay for the project until, the check comes through from the IRS. We see this with houses of worship typically being done through grants, loans, cash. Those are some of the most common ways that we see these projects financed. One thing to note for projects that are funded by restricted grants, which is pretty common, If the amount of the restricted grant plus the amount of the potential credit exceeds the cost of the project, then the amount of the credit, say that 30%, is reduced down so that the restricted grant and the credit don't exceed the total cost of the project, so 100%. Basically, what we're saying there is that you can't double dip with these federal tax credits. And then if you're paying attention, maybe you noticed on the first slide, I said, these credits can vary from 30 to 70%. That's a pretty big variation. How does that happen? There's certain bonus adders that can add to that base credit. So if certain requirements are met, that 30% can increase. But on the flip side of the coin, there are some requirements that have to be met. And if you don't meet them, then that 30% can be reduced down. So ask AC any questions about what those bonus adders are. All right, this is a very important slide. So it's really important to understand your entity's taxable year and filing deadlines because you cannot claim these credits through elective pay on a late filed return. This is a very strict rule. So what does this look like? First, the project needs to be placed in service. So for investment tax credits, again, that section 48E that we see most commonly with houses of worship, placed in service is when the project is ready for its intended use, it's operational. For production tax credits, which is a different credit, and if you have questions about this, say maybe you have really big project and the production tax credit might make more sense for you, but that's based when the electricity or other eligible output is produced, sold, consumed, or stored. I think it's pretty unlikely that any houses of worship will be using the production tax credit, but if you are, we would love to know about it and go into some of the nuances there. Next is the taxable year. So the taxable year for the entity could be the calendar year or the fiscal year. Again, meeting the deadline is critical. So returns are due. This is like what needs to be bold, flashing lights. The tax returns are due 4.5 months after the end of the taxable year, or a total of 10.5 months if the entity files a timely extension using Form 8868. The extension process is super easy. It's just this form, you fill it out, you're accepted, and you get that extension. And then I think I've hammered this home, but in case you missed it, you can't claim these credits on a late filed return. And then a quick note, especially since we have houses of worship on this call, non-governmental entities, they're required to e-file, which requires a specific software and most likely will require the assistance of an accountant. And Minho is actually going to talk more about that during his portion of the presentation. All right, next slide. That was a lot. I'm talking a lot. Let's go over the process one more time, a little more simplified, broken into these 3 buckets. So the first is you place it in service, the project, and then you're going to complete a pre-filing registration process. So what the pre-filing registration process is the entity will go on to an IRS website and register each unique project for which the credit is going to be claimed with the IRS, and then the IRS will receive that, review it, and then provide a unique registration number. Next step, sort of the meat and potatoes of the process is filing the tax return. There's specific forms based on the credit type, but almost all tax-exempt entities will start with the 990T, and then you're going to want to make sure that you have supporting documentation for those tax returns as well. Again, does anybody know when those forms are due? They're due 4.5 months after the end of the taxable year, unless you request that extension. Last step, best step, is the IRS is going to make a payment for eligible tax returns. After the filing, they're statutorily required to pay within 45 days. We're seeing kind of a variation in when folks are actually receiving the money, but we're telling folks to expect maybe around a year. And AC is going to talk a little bit more about that in their section of the presentation. But on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit why we're seeing that variation. So these credits are still absolutely being paid. It's written into the tax code. There's a statutory obligation to pay these out. The IRS has said, there's been some delay because the government entities and in the past, other entities are able to paper file. Remember, churches won't be able to paper file, they have to e-file. But this manual processing is really labor intensive. So that's what the IRS has attributed most of this delay to. I think as folks are aware on this call as well, that the IRS is experiencing staffing shortages. And then, like I said, in the past, people love these credits and more entities paper file than expected. We're going to share out these slides for y'all. But this also has numbers on how to contact the IRS, websites, numbers, etc., to check on the status of your credit. And with that, I will pass to the esteemed AC Meyer to dive a little more into the details of these tax credits. Thank you, AC.
Yeah, thank you very much for going through the overview of these credits, Camilla. I see a couple of questions in the chat. One of those, when we talk about changes to the IRA, we will talk a little bit about those accelerated timelines. So, Adam, that is coming up. I do want to address John's questions. There is no total dollar limit on the tax credit. There is that percentage of eligible costs, but there is no maximum amount related to that for most of the credits. For things like electric vehicle chargers, assuming those get into place, I believe there is a $100,000 limit on those credits per port. I don't know that we've seen anybody actually hit that limit. It's not something that typically is done. And yes, unfortunately, air source heat pumps are not eligible for these credits. They have to be ground source in order to be eligible for the investment tax credit under these rules. There may still be local and state level incentives or incentives through your local utility provider, but those are not things that are covered by the federal credits. And with that, we'll move on a little bit to the first discussion about the major changes last year from the One Big Beautiful Bill. There were some major changes on the timelines for solar and wind primarily. Things like the prohibited foreign entities requirements, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, will apply to any of the investment or production tax credits. But solar and wind specifically are the two project types that are potentially subject to these accelerated placement and service deadlines. Essentially, the requirements around solar and wind are that such projects have to be placed in service by the end of 2027 if construction begins after July 4th of this year. So solar and wind energy projects that are able to begin construction on or before July 4th of this year would still retain the original phase out dates that were applicable. So that would be phase outs potentially going into the 2030s. For most of the rooftop solar, that's a way longer timeline than is necessary, but that does give a little bit longer runways for the larger projects if there are things like community solar or more significant projects. But for rooftop solar, if it doesn't start construction on or before July 5th or July 4th this year, it will have to be in service before the end of 2027. The HR1, One Big Beautiful Bill, also repealed that clean commercial vehicle credit for electric vehicles that were acquired after September 30th of last year. If those vehicles weren't placed into service until this year, as long as they were acquired by that time, they would still be eligible. But it's no longer possible to go out and buy a new clean commercial vehicle and have it qualify for the credit. Those have to have already been acquired. And then the 30C credit for alternative fuel vehicle refueling property, which included things like electric vehicle chargers. That property must be placed into service on or before June 30th of this year in order to be eligible for the credits. What the changes did not do was adjust any of the rules related to how elective pay works or what's required there. And it did not change the older sections 45 and 48 And older Section 48 is where that ground source heat pump credit is still kind of limping along. Frankly, I think in some cases it was just forgotten that that was a thing, but ground source heat pumps remain eligible out into the 2030s. So to the extent you have the resources to use one of those systems as compared to an air source heat pump, that eligibility is still out there. Next slide. And so impacts in practice, really, what this means is that these prohibited foreign entity rules are going to be coming into play. We'll talk a little bit more about those. They get fairly complex, and I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. But the key takeaway from the prohibited foreign entity rules is you can reach out to us and we will be glad to walk you through those. And we can work through the need for potentially retention letters if we want to talk specifically about what's going on with your projects. And Minho can talk a little bit more about that process and what it looks like through the Washington State SETCAP program. But I just want to reassure you that there's going to be some very information dense slides coming up around the prohibited foreign entity rules. And it's okay if you don't catch everything. We can walk you through that on an individualized basis. But these are really apply primarily to the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. That's where most entities are running into them. These rules start really, for the most part, we're going to already be subject to them this year. I think right now it would be fairly rare for an entity to have a situation where all of the PFE rules are not applying. And a violation of any of the applicable prohibited foreign entity restrictions would trigger a disallowance of the credit. So it's very important to kind of watch those. What these rules do not apply to are the old ground source heat pump credits. So those ground source heat pumps do not have the prohibited foreign entity rules. And that really does open that up a lot. And they also technically don't apply to electric vehicles or electric vehicle chargers. But as the clock has run down on electric vehicles and is rapidly running down on EV chargers, that's a small comfort there in those cases. Next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the overall project planning impacts of this. One of the biggest things is that if you have wind or solar projects that need that longer runway, the best thing you can do is get those under construction quickly. There is the current IRS guidance, 2 methods available to be established beginning of construction, either paying or incurring 5% of the total eligible cost of eligible equipment. And that is the final cost, so not just 5% of the estimate. If it goes over budget, that 5% of the estimate may not be enough to hit that 5% of total cost, or performing physical work of a significant nature. So on the earlier of whatever day either of those 2 things happens, a project is considered to begin construction. There was Notice 2025-42 out there, and that was very recently vacated by a federal court. So that notice is currently inapplicable. So that's the nice thing to know, is that there is currently no special rule around determining beginning of construction for these projects. That clears up a lot of the complication. Technically speaking, the IRS still has a window to appeal that ruling, but right now we've heard nothing from them about whether an appeal is in the plans for the IRS. So as of right now, we are kind of operating under the assumption that that notice is going to continue to be gone, and the beginning of construction can be established through the usual methods. So the safe harbor dates for Jeff are essentially, if a project begins construction on or before July 4th of this year, then it will have essentially until the normal expiration dates that existed prior to the passage of One Big Beautiful Bill Act. If it does not begin construction on or before July 4th of this year, wind and solar projects must be completed on or before December 31st, 2027. So that is essentially the deadline there. Next slide, we'll start talking a little bit about the prohibited foreign entity restrictions. And this is going to be, I apologize in advance, these are going to be some very dense slides. there are really three overall categories of prohibited foreign entity rules. There is the entity level rule, which looks at the ownership and control of the entity that is claiming the credit. Entities that are prohibited foreign entities are not allowed to claim the credits. There's what's called the payment rule, which looks to payments made under contracts related to certain facilities or energy storage technology. And if certain disqualifying payments are made to prohibited foreign entities, then the credit is not available with respect to that particular facility or energy storage technology materials. And there are also the material assistance rules, which look at the sourcing of the materials used in qualified facilities or qualified technologies. And essentially, what all of these have in common is they are looking to ties and connections to what are called covered nations. Those are statutorily defined and currently limited to China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. The primary concern here is China, given the amount of battery energy storage that must be sourced from China, because that is the only place where it's possible to mine a lot of the minerals, as well as one of the major producers of solar panels right now. So Iran, Russia, North Korea, very few entities are sourcing materials or are connected with those countries for other reasons. But connections with China, given their presence in the energy market, that is likely to be significant. The entity level and payment rules begin to apply in the first taxable year after July 4th of 2025. For most entities, that's going to be the taxable year that begins January 1st, 2026. If you're operating on a different fiscal year, taxable year, that's something that you can reach out to us through the SETCAP program, and we can kind of talk you through that. The material assistance rules apply for any project that begins construction on or after January 1st, 2026. So anything that's begun construction this year is already subject to those material assistance rules. And kind of as discussed earlier, violating any of the three rules is enough to disqualify a particular facility from claiming the credits. I do want to point out there's also Notice 2026-15, which provides some interim guidance around the material assistance rules ahead of forthcoming proposed regulations. We still have not seen the proposed regulations. Treasury has not released those. Probably they're still in the drafting stage. Treasury is very resource constrained. They're very personnel constrained right now, and it's taking them a longer time than usual to promulgate some of these regulations. So we are still operating under this notice and the interim guidance that it has around the material assistance rules. Next slide. So these material assistance rules, again, apply to anything that begins construction after December 31st of 2025, so anything beginning this year. And the physical work test and 5% safe harbors currently apply to all technologies, so the standard beginning of construction determinations are in use for these as well. Essentially, the way this works is these projects must meet a minimum specified percentage of manufactured components that are produced by non-prohibited foreign entities, and the required percentage threshold adjusts per year, so it increases year on year. Currently, the threshold percentage is 40% for projects that begin construction in 2026. Again, that increases, I think, eventually to up to 55% for qualified facilities. There's a separate higher percentage required for battery storage technology. So it's important here to make sure that you are engaging with experienced tax counsel who can help walk you through which particular percentage might be applicable to energy plans. Because things like battery energy storage, like power walls, those types of things, will continue to be eligible for the credits well past the end of 2027. So a lot of those kind of disaster resilience projects will remain viable, and it will be important to pay attention to the material assistance rules as they apply to those projects. But essentially, right now, it's still possible also to rely on supplier certifications to establish the material assistance cost ratio, which is that percentage ratio that we just talked about. Those supplier certifications can talk about the content percentages that are in equipment provided by those suppliers. And there are requirements around those that, again, we can kind of talk you through in one-on-one discussions. Next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the entity level rules. Essentially, these are rules related to the nature of the entity that is claiming the credit. Prohibited foreign entities are separated into either specified foreign entities or foreign influenced entities. Again, it's determined by ties to the covered nations, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And kind of when this determination is made shifts a little bit. For this first taxable year, the determination is made on the very first day of this taxable year. So if an entity was either a specified foreign entity or a foreign influenced entity at the beginning of this taxable year, and if they ceased to be one sometime during the taxable year, they're still going to count as one for this entire taxable year because of that determination date. For other taxable years, for years after this, that determination is going to occur on the last day of those taxable years. So if they started out fine and something happens in December, that could cause problems all the way for the entire taxable year preceding that. So it's going to be very important to be monitoring the entities that you're working with and monitoring your own connections. I think, honestly, for most faith-based institutions, it's very unlikely that a faith-based institution in the US is going to be considered a specified foreign entity or a foreign influenced entity, but it's still important to be mindful of these requirements just in case. Next slide, talk a little bit about what a specified foreign entity and a foreign influenced entity is. Specified foreign entities are certain entities specifically named, primarily Chinese military companies operating in the US. That's not going to be an issue for this group. Certain governments of covered nations. I don't think that's likely to be an issue for this group, but I don't know how every faith is structured, and I suppose it'd be possible, although a fairly remote possibility there, as well as citizens and nationals of certain covered nations, and that potentially could crop up in this context. Again, I think it would be very rare and very unlikely, but it's still worth checking. And then companies, organizations that are organized under the laws of covered nations or conduct their principal business in those nations, as well as entities controlled by any of the above. And again, both of these last two categories are, I think, unlikely for faith-based institutions. That said, again, important to know kind of who your leadership structure is and what ties they might have there just in case. But again, I think for this group, this is going to be probably the lowest level concern. Foreign influenced entities are entities for which ownership or control is attributable. It rolls up to one of these specified foreign entities. Again, I think this is an unlikely category for this group overall, but we're mentioning it for completeness and it's important to be aware of. Next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the payment rules. This is something that can become an issue for a lot of entities and in kind of a sneaky way. So the way the payment rules work, there's a lot of kind of very specific moving pieces, but at a very high level, essentially, if an entity is making payments to someone for kind of maintenance, control, operation of these eligible properties, and that entity is a foreign influenced entity or a specified foreign entity, and the contract would give them what's called effective control of the eligible property. Payments made under that contract would potentially disqualify that property from the credit. And what they're looking at here for effective control is something like, let's say, a Chinese company has the exclusive right to perform maintenance on a facility. That exclusive maintenance right could theoretically allow that company to decline to perform the maintenance, prevent maintenance from being done by anybody else, and through that mechanism, effectively stop that facility from operating. Um, that type of situation is what that effective control provision is designed to prevent for these projects that receive funding through elective pay. So the idea here is that they don't want any possibility for an entity that is connected to one of these covered nations to potentially gum up the works of these projects. At least that's the stated theory. I think some of the theory here is just make it complicated. But again, this is something that we can walk through with you if there are particular questions about an entity that you want to work with for a maintenance and operations contract, things like that. And we can help out there. The idea really is to make sure that overall say on whether the property continues to operate, what its output is, etc., rests with the entity that owns the property and not potentially with an intransigent maintenance provider or a situation like that. And with all of that done, and I apologize and thank you all for your patience through these very dense slides, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Minho to talk a little bit about what Washington State SETCAP program is and how that can help all of you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much to AC and Camilla for providing all of that fantastic information. All of that information was provided in a clear and concise manner, but I also know that it was a lot of information, and that is what this Washington SETCAP program is here to do is to help you, navigate this landscape even further. So what is Washington SETCAP? Next slide, please. SETCAP stands for the Washington Clean Energy Tax Credit Assistance Program, called SETCAP for short. And we are partnered with the state of Washington, namely the Department of Commerce, to provide free technical and legal assistance to Washington entities to help you access these tax credits. And as Camilla and AC, described earlier in this presentation, there is a significant financial benefit opportunity here for you if you're contemplating one of these projects that are eligible. And so this program does prioritize support to those that are tax exempt and that can leverage the elective pay mechanism. And religious institutions are considered tax exempt for the most part. And so this program really is here to serve you. Next slide, please. How does this program work? So we really have identified three main ways in which we can support entities, differentiated by the three sort of buckets of work you see on the slide here. Before I dive into each of these individually, I'll take a step back. The very first step to receive help through our program is to submit an intake form with us. There will be a future slide with links to all of the resources, including this intake form. But once you submit this form, a member of our team will reach out to you to schedule a 30-minute call, at which time we will talk to you. We will learn more about the projects you're considering, learn more about the questions that you have. And then from that conversation, identify if you fall into one of these three categories to receive, one of our support services. The first category is ready to learn. So this really refers to entities that may not actually have a project under consideration. You may not be sure if you have a project that's eligible. Maybe you just want to learn more about the tax credits so that you, in the future, are better equipped to navigate a project. If this refers to you, then our main support and resources offered are a suite of resources, actually. L4GG has developed trainings, fact sheets, guidance briefs, variety of different resources, including, separate webinar recordings, just so that you can sort of navigate these resources on your own pace, and learn everything that you might need to learn, to increase your literacy around the tax credits and tackle a project sometime in the future. All of these resources can be found on our SETCAP hub, which is our central program webpage. There is a ready to learn section on that website, that includes all of our resources, and it's organized by type. And so if this refers to you, we have included a link to the hub in our chat. And as I mentioned, a future slide will include all of our links as well. So moving on now to the more direct, technical assistance services that we provide. Ready to plan. So this refers to entities that are actively developing a project, whether that means you are in the midst of construction for a project, maybe you're in the design phase, maybe you're kind of, sort of thinking about working with contractors for a project. If you're actively developing a project in any capacity, then we offer free legal assistance to help you design your project to make sure that you're maximizing the elective pay potential of your project. What that means is that you will work with either one of our in-house attorneys, which may include AC, which may include Camilla, or one of our subcontracted legal partners. They will be your official lawyer. So you'll sign a retention letter with one of our attorneys, to establish that client-attorney relationship. And then they will essentially be a lawyer in your corner throughout the entire sort of project development phase. So they can review your documentation for you. They can sort of answer any sort of questions that you may have about, whether your project is eligible. They'll really work with you hand in hand to ensure that, if there is a tax credit, potential in your project, they'll really help you get there. It can be very, very helpful to have a lawyer in your corner for obvious reasons during this process, to review documentation and whatnot. And to reiterate this legal service is completely free to you and offered through this program. So that is ready to plan. And the third and final bucket here is ready to file. So let's say that you've moved through your construction process. The project is now complete. It has been placed in service. It's in the ground. It's energized, and now all you need to do is file for the credit. I say all you need to do, but as Camilla described earlier in this presentation, there are a few steps involved with the filing process. And thankfully, we're partnered with Giraffe Financial, to provide a free filing service. So Giraffe really specializes in supporting entities and filing for these types of credits. They offer a completely free, through this program, turnkey solution in which all you need to do is sign up on their platform. They will pre-register the project on your behalf. They will fill out the tax forms on your behalf. They will electronically file with the IRS also on your behalf, and track the credit as it moves through the IRS process. All of these services are completely free through the Washington SETCAP program. They're a close partner of ours in the sort of the elective pay space. And they're also contracted through the SETCAP program to support the filing process. So as you can see, we're really the way this program is structured is to really provide, services no matter where you're at in your journey. If you're ready to learn, we have resources to help you. If you're ready to plan, we have lawyers to help you. If you're ready to file, we have an accounting firm to help you. So we really hope this sort of, unlocks some of these credits for you. We hope this empowers you to come to talk to us and fill out our intake form so that we can provide additional support. Next slide. So these are the two links that are most relevant, for our program. The first link there is the SETCAP hub, which houses our resources, and second, and more importantly, is our intake form. If you think you might need help, even if you're not sure, please fill out that form. hop on the phone with us and we'll talk you through everything. Next slide, please. I also wanted to share some highlights about how we have helped religious institutions through our program already. This program has been running for the better part of 2 years now, and after, during the course of this program life cycle, we've helped a bunch of churches, some temples, in terms of accessing some of these credits and providing some pretty valuable services. So in the first instance, we have just supported a church in filing for a rooftop solar project. The filing was just completed just about a month ago, and they are expected to receive around $27,000 in tax credits, which is pretty significant, especially when it comes to a small church and the sort of economics involved. Another example is we are actively working with a religious institution. So actually, it's like a conglomerate of various churches with our legal partner, Vyson, who is providing direct guidance on tax credit eligibility and prohibited foreign entity requirements for an over $620,000 solar and battery storage project. So this is quite a sizable project. You can do the math. The expected credits on this, if assuming 30% is quite large. And so, this is one that we're really excited about, and we've done a lot of great help, and our partners at Avisen have done a lot of great help in terms of supporting this entity, sort of through the planning process, looking forward to eventually filing for this one once it's completed. And next slide. With that, I believe we have time for questions and some open discussion. I do see that we have answered some questions already in the chat, but please feel free to either type additional questions in the chat or come off mute and share your questions with us so that we can answer them live. Any questions from the group? If you don't think of one now, that's okay. And if you think of one later, please fill out our intake form, and that's a great way to get in touch with us to have your questions answered also. But definitely wanted to, leave some space here if any questions come up.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so one of the big challenges obviously is financing and paying for these types of projects. Do either of you have a list of resources that are available, or individuals or organizations that you could put us in touch with to explore the different financing options or means of paying for these types of projects?
Yeah, actually, a few come to mind immediately that we can share with you. The first is the Washington Department of Commerce actually has a resource called the Fund Hub. Let me find that resource and I can throw it in the chat and share it with you after the presentation as well. But I think it's sort of like a central um, yeah, it's called the Fund Hub Washington, sort of like a central way for entities to like become connected with specific grants within the state for these types of projects. So that's one good place to start. A second opportunity is the Department of Commerce also has a sister program called the Federal Grant Writing Assistance Program. And so they provide free sort of grant application support for entities to seek federal grants to fund projects as well. So those are the two that come to mind that tackle sort of the state component and also the federal component as they pertain to grants. And then I will also leave it open for Camilla, AC, others on my team to share any other opportunities they can think of.
As I say, off the top of my head, I don't think I have anything to add beyond what you've discussed. Although through some of our other through our Elective Pay Sprint Hub, I know we do have access to Carol here at Lawyers for Good Government, who has some experience in helping entities locate funding sources. It's not necessarily a full-on state-level resource in the way that the federal funds grant writing program is, but that Sprint Hub does have the ability to kind of walk through potential funding as well, and potentially connect entities with funders who may be looking to help out in that area.
As an aside, and I think this work is still nascent, but the Washington State Green Bank was just capitalized for $25 million this summer. And their, goal is to support entities throughout the state in terms of financing clean energy projects. This could look like a bridge loan. This could look like other sort of mechanisms. There isn't an exact offering for the Green Bank yet. That's actively in development, but when that pipeline opens, we are sure to be through the SETCAP program. We're sure to be in close communication with the Green Bank to be able to sort of funnel any potential projects and financing opportunities their way to sort of build their pipeline. So there's no sort of action item there yet, but I think it's something that's on the horizon that's quite exciting and something that this community can and should keep an eye on. Once that sort of opens up to the public, that's quite a significant bucket of funding to potentially support entities throughout the state. They don't have, in my conversation with the Green Bank, they've indicated that they're wanting to support all different types of entities in terms of providing, potential financing packages. They're not just looking at larger organizations. They're not just looking at, for profits. They're really trying to support everyone, including smaller nonprofit projects as well. So, just wanted to, plant that flag in people's minds for future consideration.
Do you know if those types of grants are going to be more along of subsidizing the rate of the loan or looking more at granting, just granting the loan in general? Is it going to be market rates or more subsidized rates?
I think I'm not entirely sure at this time. They're still
Okay.
really developing their product offerings, and they haven't really, released this funding for public loan yet. But that's I'm sure we're gonna get some news about that soon, and
Okay.
as soon as we do, we're hoping to share it. So. Any other questions?
Is there any time frame on that? Putting out those, is it within the next 3 months, or are you thinking beyond that time period?
Are you talking about the Green Bank financing?
Yeah, the Green Bank financing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the initial intel that I received was that they were hoping to begin. They're actively building their pipeline, but the funds won't release for actual use until end of the summer. So that's like a good point to check back in, I would say.
Okay.
Mhm.
And Jeff, no guarantee that the Elective Pay Sprint Hub, but I would encourage you to go ahead and use that link, and then just to note that you're interested in green finance. And that's separate from the SETCAP program, but through that, the SETCAP can also advise on the clean energy tax credits if you need that as well.
Yeah, we actually have a project that's shovel ready, and we're just waiting for putting our financing package together. So
Great. That's great to hear.
I'm not sure if I'm seeing any more questions coming across. For those, is there anything else from you all at L4GG?
I don't think
No,
so.
no, that concludes
Okay.
our section here. Thanks.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to give you a couple minutes back in your afternoon and wherever you may be. But so grateful that you're joining us. And just a couple reminders. One is that this was recorded. You will get the recording. You'll also get the slides. And we'll make sure to, in that email that you get the recording, that you'll also have those links as well to the intake form and the SETCAP hub, so that if you have additional questions that come up beyond this time, that you have access to be able to ask those questions and make sure that they're able to be answered in way better than I could answer them. So again, thank you all so much for being present for this webinar. We are grateful for your presence, L4GG, for all of your ways in which you support sacred communities in empowering the missions and the work that we have to do in the world. So grateful for you all, and hope that whatever comes with the rest of your day, may it be what you need. Blessings.
Always a delight to work with all y'all.